We have some interesting news that's come out this morning because this is one that really wasn't on our radar. It wasn't something we were even thinking about right now. Of all the new things that President Trump and his administration is doing, one of them we didn't really expect to see was the FBI deciding to probe into a couple of, I guess you could say, cases that were closed, but were almost cold cases. They had nowhere to go. So 3 of them from the Biden administration. The one that's obviously we're looking at the closest is the leak of the Dobbs decision. That was the overturning of Roe versus Wade. You may remember that came out months before the decision was actually made. An early draft of that decision was leaked, and the Supreme Court announced a few months later that they were not able to locate anyone or find out any information about how or when it was leaked or how it got leaked. But the new FBI, led by Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, and Dan Bongino made a statement about this, said, that's not good enough for us. We would like to do an FBI probe. Now, it opens up a lot of doors, whether they can actually do this or not, as the Supreme Court, kind of can dictate its own future in that sense. But maybe they'll welcome this because we'd like to see some answers. That's all we're looking for. I think that's what they're looking for as well. It's not necessarily that this is criminal. We're not even sure what the rules are, the laws are in that in terms of that situation, but someone should be held accountable if they can be located. So the FBI decided to reopen that. They decided to reopen also the drugs that were found in the White House during the Biden administration and figure out if there's any more information on that, as well as some of the January 6th issues that may have been part of a plan. We're going to find out more of that as we go on. But of course, the big one we're looking at, Will, is this Dobbs decision because that impacts our people the most. That's right. And really what it shows is that Dan Bongino and Kash Patel at the FBI are looking into things that seem to almost get swept under the rug to some degree. They were big national stories that when you have the resources of federal law enforcement, you'd think you'd be able to get to the bottom of fairly quickly. And this is what Dan Bongino said on X over the weekend about this update. And it says, shortly after swearing in, the director and I evaluated a number of cases of potential public corruption that understandably have garnered public interest. We made the decision to either reopen or push additional resources and investigative attention to these cases. It does almost set up a little bit of a conflict between the executive branch with the FBI and the Department of Justice and the judicial branch. The Supreme Court itself used the Supreme Court marshal to do the initial investigation and in some ways close that. And I think there is a little bit of an irony when you look at all the cases before the court right now, before the Supreme Court, where the executive branch is arguing these are foreign policy decisions. These aren't things that the judiciary can weigh into. This is exclusively the power of the executive. Is the Supreme Court going to claim a very similar situation, say, this is an in-house investigation, this isn't a federal law enforcement issue, this is an executive branch issue? Because the Supreme Court of the United States is supposed to be held up to a very different standard, and the standard was really violated. I can't remember another time where it felt that vulnerable than in that moment. Because remember, after the decision was leaked, that is when you started having all of the death threats that happened to the more conservative-leaning, the ones who voted to overturn Roe. You had people in front of their houses. That was before the decision was made. A lot of people thought that was to pressure to switch, because they can, to switch their opinions. That was the unleash the whirlwind, as Schumer said. So that's not uncommon. What was uncommon was this pressure being put on them because of that leaked document. So maybe we'll get some answers. And I'm curious what the audience thinks about, are these things you want the FBI to be doing, or are these things that you don't care about and say, just let it go away and keep focusing on restoring law and order in this country? But as the an FBI supervisory special agent retired said, the FBI can walk and chew gum at the same time. But give us a call. What are your thoughts on these? 1-800-684-3110 to be heard on air. We'll get to those calls. But when you look at this, Logan, it is interesting because Kash Patel and Dan Bongino are, I think, other than actually getting back to the work of the FBI, they are trying to rehabilitate the image of the FBI. And when you look at these 3 cases on their face,
they should have been something that federal law enforcement could get to the bottom of very quickly. Obviously, the Dobbs leak decision was handled by the Supreme Court marshal, not by the FBI. Now, I don't know. They haven't publicly said whether or not there was coordination between the marshal at the Supreme Court and the FBI to use resources, but it was spearheaded by the Supreme Court marshal, so their own in-house law enforcement. The White House case should have been, with all of the security cameras and monitoring and security at the White House, should have been something that law enforcement could have uncovered pretty easily. Well, and also the January 6th one, they had all the footage. They had all of this. This was the case of where there were alleged pipe bombs placed around D.C. On January 6th, and something that they were able to track individual people who were in the vicinity of the Capitol and go to their home. Right. But someone they had footage of placing a pipe bomb in D.C., it's this big mystery that's never been discovered. I see a lot of the comments coming in, and a lot of the comments aren't necessarily we care about who did it. We care about why it was covered up and why it was not investigated further. That, to me, is a bigger question. Right. That's the real question. You're right, listener, whoever said that in comments on YouTube. You're right. Because, again, what's it going to matter to find out who brought these substances into the White House? It's not. But you could go into why was it covered up? Who covered these things up? Who covered up the situations? And who leaked these documents? Those are the things. And not only who leaked the documents, why wasn't it found out? As we've been able to see with a lot of these, horrifying, let's just be honest, like the United Healthcare murder and those kind of things that happen, is there are cameras, and I've been talking to our security here, there are cameras just about everywhere. So just know when you're walking down the street, they can likely back it up as far as you can imagine to figure out not only where you're going, but where you've been. They might back it up into your front door with so many cameras that exist. So you're right. It shouldn't be that hard. Now, maybe they thought this isn't worth the FBI's time. We're just going to move forward, and maybe they're right, but you can have that discussion. But Dan Bongino, and look, I'm sure the Biden administration didn't want the answers to those questions out there. You didn't want who leaked the Dobbs decision. You didn't want who was doing this in the White House. Again, it's Washington, D.C. There's a lot of crazy stuff that happens. I've said that before. It may not be nearly as nefarious as you think it may be, but Dan Bongino and the FBI are going to reopen these things. I see some people say that this is what they want them to do, and I see a lot of comments saying, hey, there's a lot of other things that we feel have been more important over the years that you promised us that haven't gotten done yet. Maybe focus on some of those. Well, and I feel like those are valid statements. The Department of Justice got some egg on their face very early with the Epstein client list situation where Pam Bondi went on TV and said, this is coming out. There was the unfortunate photo op with the binders that some influencers got. And that turned out to be a very bad PR moment for the Department of Justice on the same with the team, hardcore base, with the base that's rooting for them, that's wanting these things. So I do think it's a very not dangerous in the fact of like this could bring down the FBI, but dangerous PR move also to announce these if they aren't confident they can provide answers with that. Because if they don't, it's another failure of something that should be reasonably easy for the law enforcement to uncover the truth about. Yeah, and reading the comments, people are coming through a lot of that. The JFK list is one they said, well, not JFK list, the files. They were eventually released, but they weren't necessarily what people were hoping for or expecting. I think that's probably true for a lot of government documentation, if we're just being honest. Do I think that they have just like, here's a one paragraph summary of everything you need to know? Probably not. They'd rather dump 100,000 pages on you, and hopefully you have to decide how to figure it out. There's a lot of calls coming in, a lot of comments coming in as well. I think let's go quickly to a phone call just to get y'all going. Let's go to Robert. You're on the air.
I thought that we need to thoroughly investigate and go after Comey and the other head of the FBI during the last 4-year administration.
Well, we know that James Comey was visited by the Secret Service. He's been interviewed, right? But he is he's definitely playing the victim. That's what kind of his MO has been since he was fired. That he is this just a grandpa in a moral compass of America. That he is the shining light, and that he is all that is good about this nation.
Wears sweaters. He walks on the beach.
We've gone through the litany of ways he has bent the rules and kind of flown in the face of the rule of law in the United States trying to get at a sitting president of the United States.
And also to get attention.
Right.
To get FaceTime. It's remember with Clinton, like it was always these like big build up, like you said, showman kind of things, and then get in there and be like, I'm sorry. I'm just a sweet little man walking on the beach and looking at seashell formations.
Well, and even with that, where he held those press conferences, the press conference where he said, we decline to recommend charges against
after 20
Clinton,
minutes of giving the reasons why she should have been.
and then also reopening it days later, when even Kash Patel has brought up that the FBI shouldn't even be the face of these things. They make their recommendations, but it's the Department of Justice that chooses which cases to prosecute and not. So he was even taking away from the Attorney General the ability to make those decisions by getting out front, making these public statements, and trying to be the authority and the dictator on law and order in this country. And even Kash Patel said, we're getting away from that. We're not going to be the ones holding a press conference saying we decline to move forward with charges. He goes, we investigate and we give it to the DOJ and they decide.
We are so excited to announce the ACLJ's brand new app, completely redesigned to provide you with the best tools available to partner with us at the ACLJ. You can watch the daily Seculo program, sign the petitions, customize your ACLJ membership experience, donate with the click of a button, and receive up-to-the-minute critical updates that the mainstream media can't censor. Just scan the QR code on your screen or go to your phone's app store, search ACLJ, and click install. It's that simple.